I float awkwardly down the station corridor, one hand pressed against the smooth, glowing wall to keep from colliding with the low-gravity panels that shift unpredictably. My boots, calibrated for normal gravity, squeak against the polished metal, and I can already feel the irritation building, partly because of the sudden assignment, partly because my stomach is doing an interpretive dance I didn't consent to. Across from me, she appears, tall, impossibly poised, and terrifyingly calm. Her long ears curve upward and outward like a sculptor's idea of elegance, twitching subtly as she tilts her head, observing me with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. She wears the sort of fitted uniform that suggests she spends more time intimidating her crew than actually leading them, and yet there's something mesmerizing in the way she carries herself, like the whole station bends just to accommodate her stride. "Careful," she says, her voice low and smooth, yet pointed like a laser cutting through the ambient hum of the station. "You move like a malfunctioning drone." Her ears flick sharply at the end of the insult, and I have to resist the urge to reach out and poke them, just to see if they respond the way I imagine. "Malfunctioning drones have charm," I mutter under my breath, because apparently the first rule of survival around her is sarcasm, and I am, admittedly, well-trained. She does not laugh. She never laughs, not really, unless you count the occasional sarcastic trill she directs at maintenance bots when they fail to do exactly what she wants. Today, I am the maintenance bot. Not literally, of course, though with her scrutiny I sometimes feel that way. We are in the orbital station's outer wing, a tangle of corridors that shift their configuration with the slightest command from the central AI. The walls glow with pale cyan lights, and occasionally a panel slides open to reveal gears spinning or maintenance drones hovering with tools dangling from magnetic hooks. I glance at one such drone, which tilts at an awkward angle and then, as if taking offense at my gaze, lurches toward me. I step aside quickly, only for it to bump into a utility cart that tips and spills a collection of floating tools in every direction. The alien woman tilts her head, her long ears twitching with amusement. "You humans have the grace of a drunken nebula," she says, her voice drawing out the last word with exaggerated emphasis as though I should take notes. "Better than the elegance of a sarcastic gecko," I reply, nodding toward a small robotic pet that darts along the walls, leaving a glowing trail in its wake. The gecko flicks its mechanical tail and climbs onto her shoulder, peering at me with a light that could almost be described as judgmental. She flinches and waves it off, and I almost laugh out loud at the absurdity. This woman, so fearsome and commanding, slightly defeated by a robotic lizard. "Do not think your jokes will save you," she says, though her voice carries a hint of reluctant amusement. "I have seen every human trick, every desperate gambit, every pitiful attempt to assert some semblance of control." "Then maybe you've never seen a human trip over a zero-gravity cart and somehow survive without looking completely ridiculous," I respond, and immediately realize I have just given her more material to mock me with. She does not miss a beat. "Impressive," she says, and I swear her ears twitch with laughter, though she would never admit it. "I almost believed you might have competence hidden beneath the layers of your awkwardness. Almost." I sigh, floating slightly as a magnetic pad underfoot adjusts, tossing me a few inches forward. This station, with its constant reconfiguration, is a character in itself, more unpredictable than the alien before me. I watch as a ceiling panel slides open, revealing a network of conduits snaking like silver rivers across the structure, and she moves with the confidence of someone entirely at home in chaos, stepping around the conduits as if gravity itself bends for her. "You navigate these corridors like a cat avoiding laser pointers," I say. She raises an eyebrow, a motion so slight it could be mistaken for a flicker of light, but I know it's a signal she is analyzing me. "You humans are amusing when you try to be witty," she replies, her voice carrying a teasing edge now, softer than before. Her long ears swivel, flicking slightly, and I swear one of them almost nudges a floating toolkit out of my way. I catch it just in time, holding it awkwardly in midair like a prize I didn't earn. We continue along the corridor, a strange dance of tension and farce. I attempt to steady myself, only to accidentally bump into a wall panel that slides open, revealing an emergency plasma conduit that hisses like a wounded serpent. My hand flashes reflexively toward it, and she arches a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "You are going to destroy this station before you even leave the docking bay," she says, tone sharp, but with a humor I detect only because of the way her ears twitch. "Better me than the I reply, and we both hear the faint chuckle in her voice, though she quickly masks it as a sigh. The station hums around us, lights flickering in response to our movements. Somewhere, the gecko clicks its claws in approval, and I almost feel like I have an audience for this absurd performance. Finally, we arrive at the central observation deck, a wide expanse of transparent panels showing the storm-lashed planet below. Lightning forks across its atmosphere, illuminating jagged mountains and swirling storms, reflections dancing across her sharp features. She steps forward, glancing down at the planet as if it owes her obedience, her posture demanding respect without saying a word. "You see that storm?" she asks, voice low and almost reverent. "It is nothing compared to the chaos humans bring wherever they tread." Her ears twitch slightly as she turns to face me, challenging me, daring me to respond. "I don't bring chaos," I say, and then immediately add, "not on purpose anyway." I grin, despite knowing she will likely find this attempt at humor inadequate. She studies me for a moment, and I realize this is the first real test of our interaction. In this zero-gravity expanse between the hum of the station and the crackling storms below, I have to assert myself, not with brute force but with wit, audacity, and perhaps a little luck. She tilts her head, letting her long ears drift like antennae in the artificial breeze of the observation deck. Then she speaks, slower now, calculating. "Perhaps there is a spark in you, human, a dangerous spark. Or maybe it's just static electricity," I say, floating too close and immediately jerking back when one of her ears brushes my shoulder. She blinks, startled for the briefest instant, and I think almost ridiculously that I see her uncertainty, the first crack in her flawless arrogance. The storm rages below, the station hums around us, and we orbit a planet that seems as untamable as her temper. I catch the gecko flicking its mechanical tail at me, a small, ridiculous companion, and I can't help but think that perhaps surviving her arrogance will require more than caution. It will require audacity, humor, and the most unpredictable move of all. I glance at her again, sharp and elegant, ears twitching in ways that suggest amusement, irritation, and something unreadable all at once. My stomach tightens not with fear, but with the delicious possibility of a confrontation unlike anything I've ever faced. Somewhere in the station, a maintenance drone clatters noisily, almost as if cheering me on. I float a little higher, grin spreading across my face, and prepare for the impossible. Standing my ground with humor, wit, and a spark of chaos against the most arrogant woman in the galaxy. And just maybe I think she might find that spark electrifying. The corridor twisted around itself like a Möbius strip, walls glowing with soft amber light that pulsed faintly, sinking to the hum of the station's power grid. I floated cautiously, arms spread like a clumsy wingsuit pilot, trying to calculate the drift of the zero-gravity panels beneath my feet. She glided beside me, impossibly poised, long ears tracing elegant arcs in the air as if mapping some invisible vector of superiority. Every twitch of those ears seemed deliberate, precise, communicating disdain, amusement, or impatience with astonishing subtlety. I had to admit, this woman, terrifying as she was, moved with a grace that made me feel like a hyperactive maintenance drone in comparison. "You're still alive," she said, her voice light, almost teasing, yet carrying that edge that reminded me she could end me with a thought, or at least a flick of her wrist and the station's security bots. I expected a human of your clumsiness to have collided with a structural support or one of the floating conduits by now. Her ears flicked sharply, a small movement that somehow seemed triumphant. "And missed the chance to meet your robotic gecko again?" I replied, raising an eyebrow as the little machine zipped past me, leaving a faint trail of blue luminescence in the air. It climbed along her shoulder with the familiarity of a pet and the precision of a drone that had been programmed for mischief. She swatted it gently, though the corner of her mouth twitched like she was suppressing a laugh. "I am not your entertainment," she said, though the subtle quiver in her voice betrayed a flicker of amusement. "Good, because I've been running low on jokes that are appropriate for a galactic sovereign," I said, floating sideways to avoid a panel that slid open unexpectedly. I landed with a soft thunk on a magnetic pad that flickered beneath me. We entered the central docking bay, a vast chamber that hummed with power. Starships of all shapes and sizes floated in their berths, maintenance drones scuttling across their hulls like ants on a silver picnic table. A gravity flux field activated as we moved, causing both of us to shift slightly, almost colliding midair. I caught myself on a hovering railing while she adjusted with the elegance of someone entirely at home in zero-G. Her ears twitched with each micro-movement like twin radar dishes assessing my every motion. "Be careful," she said again, her tone softer now but still cutting. "One wrong step here and you might end up vacuum-sealed outside the station." "I prefer to think of it as tactical exploration," I replied, giving the gecko a playful salute as it scuttled along a conduit. It clicked its claws, almost in approval, and I realized I was beginning to anthropomorphize it. Not a good sign, but at least it was amusing. She ignored my comment, stepping closer to a console that projected a holographic star map. Her hands moved in intricate patterns, long fingers manipulating the map with precision. Stars twinkled and shifted, clusters forming and dissolving like liquid light. I floated nearby, trying to understand what she was doing and failing spectacularly. "You humans are fascinating," she said suddenly, glancing at me with a sharp tilt of her head. "You believe in chaos and luck masquerading as skill. I, however, prefer precision and control. Everything is measurable, calculable, except you, apparently." Her ears flicked sharply, betraying a spark of frustration or perhaps delight. "Calculable, sure," I said, floating closer, "but predictable is boring, isn't it?" The gecko leapt between us in a blur, forcing me to dodge reflexively, and I tripped into a magnetic rail with a soft clang. She flicked a hand, and a small drone zipped past, nudging me back upright. "You are reckless," she said, voice low now, almost dangerously calm, "and somehow amusing." I grinned because that sounded like progress. I'll take it. Amusing over reckless is still a win in my book. We moved further into the docking bay, passing a human transport pod that vibrated with the hum of its engines. Sparks flared as a malfunctioning welding drone accidentally touched a power conduit, and I flinched. The alien woman stepped forward without hesitation, ears alert, and with a swift movement of her hand, redirected the energy field. The sparks dissipated harmlessly, leaving me blinking in astonishment. "You could learn something from observing," she said, tone clipped but not unkind. Her ears twitched, catching some subtle shift in the air, and I noticed for the first time the faint glow along her temples, neural interface pulses responding to the electromagnetic field of the station. I had to admit it was impressive. "And you could learn something from tripping spectacularly?" I said, gesturing toward the floating tool cart I'd accidentally launched into orbit a few minutes ago. It floated midair, tools spinning in lazy arcs, and she followed my gesture with a brief flick of her hand, moving them out of danger with minimal effort. "Perhaps," she said, lips twitching in a way that suggested suppressed laughter. "But I prefer not to waste energy on theatrics. I'm trying to keep things lively," I said, floating alongside her as we approached a section of the docking bay where gravity fields fluctuated wildly. I misjudged my drift, spun in midair, and almost collided with her. She caught me by the sleeve of my uniform with ease, and her ears twitched with what I could only describe as mock irritation. "Lively," she said, voice smooth as liquid metal. "I would call it catastrophic incompetence." "Same difference," I replied, and she didn't respond immediately. I noticed her hand brushing lightly along the console as if she were suppressing some urge to scold me further, or perhaps to laugh. The gecko clicked in approval again, and I wondered if it had taken sides. We entered the maintenance hub, a chaotic tangle of floating machinery, robotic arms, and holographic schematics. Sparks and laser grids crisscrossed the room, and I floated carefully, trying to avoid being turned into a human pinball. She moved effortlessly, adjusting a robotic arm midair with a flick of her wrist, her long ears drifting gracefully as if they were part of the control interface itself. "You see that?" she asked, gesturing toward a maintenance bot trying to recalibrate its arm. "Even machines have more competence than you." "They also have fewer opinions," I said, ducking under a laser grid and barely avoiding a floating toolkit. "I can be more entertaining." Her eyes narrowed, ears flicking sharply. "Perhaps, but entertaining does not equal effective." "Depends on your definition of effective," I said, bouncing slightly against a magnetic panel. The gecko zipped past me, bumping against her shoulder in perfect timing. She startled, letting out a sharp exhale, and I almost laughed aloud at the absurdity. Even the most arrogant, terrifying alien woman has moments of unpredictability. Finally, we reached a secure section of the hub where the AI monitored every ship and system in the station. She activated a holographic panel, stars shifting and planets rotating in precise orbits. Her long ears twitched with each subtle adjustment, and I realized I had been holding my breath, watching her manipulate the environment with a combination of elegance and lethal precision. "You humans," she said finally, turning toward me, "constantly defy logic, and yet I find myself intrigued." Her voice softened slightly, just enough that I could detect the trace of humor beneath the arrogance. "Do not mistake this for approval." "Noted," I said, floating upright and trying to look dignified. "But it's progress, right? Intrigued counts as a win." She tilted her head, ears tracing arcs in the artificial air. "Perhaps," she said, and I could almost hear the amusement she refused to voice fully. "But do not grow complacent, human. You will need more than clumsiness and jokes to survive what comes next." I smiled because if the storm below and the chaos of this station taught me anything, it was that survival required audacity, humor, and the ability to keep your balance in zero gravity. The gecko clicked its claws again, and I decided it was a good omen. Whatever came next, I would be ready, awkwardly, clumsily, but with a spark of chaos that even she could not predict. And perhaps, just perhaps, the most arrogant woman in the galaxy might learn that sometimes the unpredictable human is the most effective force of all. The observation deck hummed with energy, gravity still fluctuating from the station's last calibration cycle. I floated along the transparent floor, peering at the swirling storms of the planet below, feeling the pull of both curiosity and something more dangerous: anticipation. She stood at the center of the room, long ears arching like twin antennas catching invisible currents, her posture perfect, commanding, unshakable. For the first time, I sensed that our dynamic had shifted, not entirely, but enough that the arrogance I had spent 2 chapters navigating now seemed fragile, almost touchable. "You have survived longer than I expected," she said, voice low but edged with that familiar amusement. Her eyes glimmered with a mixture of challenge and curiosity, the kind that could ignite chaos if underestimated. "And yet you still believe you can match me." "I don't need to match you," I said, floating closer, careful to keep a respectful distance, just enough to make you notice me. The gecko zipped along my arm, almost as if urging me on, and I couldn't help but grin at the absurdity of having a mechanical lizard as an accomplice in a standoff with one of the most intimidating beings in the galaxy. She tilted her head, ears twitching in perfect synchrony. "Notice you, yes, respect you, that is something else entirely." "Maybe I can shortcut that part," I replied, and before I could reconsider, I lunged slightly, not recklessly, but with intention. My teeth grazed her shoulder lightly. The shock of contact was immediate. Her long ears twitched violently, her eyes widening in disbelief, and I could see the calculated arrogance falter for the first time. She staggered back, one hand instinctively reaching to steady herself on a holographic console, while the gecko zipped around her, startled but intrigued. What did you just do?" she asked, voice sharp but not entirely angry, a strange quiver underneath betraying her surprise. "I bit you," I said, floating just out of reach, letting the absurdity of my own audacity hang in the air. "Not hard, just enough to get your attention." The gecko clicked its claws as if approving, and I almost laughed at the sight of her trying to reconcile her shock with the fact that a human had just pulled something completely unorthodox. Her ears twitched in a way that communicated more than her words could. "You are reckless, dangerously reckless." Her eyes scanned me as if reading a new algorithm she had never encountered. "And yet, I cannot deny it works." She let out a short, sharp laugh like metal snapping in a storm. "You have challenged me." "I think that was the plan," I said, grinning despite the flutter in my stomach. "Challenge, survive, maybe even earn a little respect." "You have earned my attention," she said, carefully choosing words that felt both precise and significant. Her posture softened just slightly, and her ears drifted down like sails catching a gentler wind. "Do not mistake this for friendship." "I wouldn't dream of it," I replied, floating in a slow circle to keep myself balanced in the fluctuating gravity fields. "But maybe an alliance, temporary of course. I'm not looking to join a dictatorship today." Her lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. Temporary alliances can be effective. Her long ears quivered with what might have been amusement or irritation, and I decided not to overanalyze. It was better to enjoy the victory while it lasted. The station's AI pinged softly, signaling a sudden drop in gravity along the deck. I stumbled slightly, catching myself on a floating railing. She extended a hand, and instead of snapping a command, she steadied me effortlessly. I looked at her hand, then back at her face, and realized for the first time that her arrogance, while intact, had been tempered. There was a new understanding between us, an acknowledgement that our encounter had shifted the balance. "You have grown," she said finally, voice calm but measured. "You were reckless, impulsive, foolish even, and yet you persisted." She tilted her head, ears twitching in that elegant alien way. "I underestimated you." "And you're still terrifying," I said, floating back and brushing a loose hair from my forehead. "But maybe less so now that you know I bite." Her laugh, sharp and melodic, echoed in the observation deck. The gecko twirled in midair, almost performing a celebratory loop, and I realized that humor, something I had leaned on from the beginning, had been a subtle weapon all along. It disarmed her, even momentarily, allowing me to assert myself without violence or surrender. "You humans," she said, shaking her head slightly, "are unpredictable. I must admit it is refreshing." Her words were precise, but I could feel the rare warmth in them, the spark of amusement and respect mingled together. "Refreshing, huh?" I said, smiling. "I'll take it. Beats being labeled a nuisance or worse." She allowed a small nod. "For now you are tolerated." "I'll take that too," I replied, and for the first time I felt an odd sense of equilibrium in our bizarre zero-gravity dance. The storms outside raged and forked with lightning across the planet below, but inside the station something had changed. The tension that had gripped us both was tempered now by understanding, humor, and an unspoken acknowledgement of boundaries and abilities. As we moved toward the docking hatch, the gecko darting ahead like a scout, I realized I had learned more than how to survive her arrogance. I had learned that audacity, humor, and a willingness to risk absurdity could equal power in its own way. She had taught me caution, precision, and the quiet strength of controlled authority. Between the two of us, a fragile balance had been struck, one that promised tension, challenge, and, occasionally, cooperation. "You will need more than bites and jokes in the future," she said, voice soft but firm as her ears twitched one last time, settling with a dignified elegance. "I know," I said, floating toward the exit, "but I'll keep practicing." I gave her a nod, half grin, half salute. She inclined her head slightly, and though her face remained